So hello and welcome everybody to this edition of the NASGP's podcast. Today we're bringing you a really current and very hot topic around the use and adoption of AI in clinical practice, and from what more around what the portfolio locum sessional GP is experiencing now. However, as more and more clinicians work in this way, it's becoming more prevalent for us to understand what these different things are. But obviously AI is massive. So we're going to keep this into a little bit of a general topic to start off with, and sort of talk a little bit around AVT, which is the ambient voice technology, which a lot of practices are now using day to day. But obviously it's just a little bit more information around how it's being used and how it's being adopted. So I'm really pleased to introduce a couple of speakers today. We've got Dr. Keith Grimes, who is, am I right in saying a former GP, Keith? Do you still?
Yeah, I don't know. I stopped practicing at the end of 2024. I'm still GMC registered, still work as a doctor, but with technology, not people.
Fine, that's fine. I don't want to get that one wrong. So yeah, so GP and digital health specialist. Specialist around clinical medtech innovation, and obviously you've worked as a GP for 25 years in and around primary care, urgent care, and sort of medical leadership side of things. But also the founder of Curistica. Have I said that right?
Oh, you said it perfectly.
Perfect. So that's a health tech innovation consultancy that really helps to build, or people who are building buyers and users of clinical AI to try and do that a bit more faster, safer and smarter, because it's a bit of a wild world out there. And Keith has spoken internationally, been an expert on panels on the Topol Review and the AI All-Party Parliament Group. And I think you've lectured in numerous universities and schools of entrepreneurship around digital health and generative AI in healthcare. Have I got that pretty much there?
Yeah. That's great. It's always odd hearing these things back. I'm like, is that me? But yes, no, that is all correct.
That's all right. I've done my job right there. And then we've got Dr. Claire Sieber as well. So hi, Claire. Claire's she's a practicing GP in West Sussex, with a clinical focus on family planning and reproductive health. But alongside her medical practice, is a CEDA accredited mediator and has over 6 years experience of mediation. So for 5 years, Claire's has served as the medical director for a local LMC committees, and has played a significant role involved in providing practical guidance to GPs, practice managers, partners, and PCNs navigating some of the disputes that happen. So that gives Claire a really great insight into the challenges faced in primary care. And you're also an ex officio member of the BMA England GP Committee as chair of the Conference of the England LMCs. That was a mouthful to get out. But obviously, Claire, you work as a portfolio and locum GP as well. So this is a really great place for you to add some context into the questions as well. So we will crack on. I'm Helen. I'm the Chief Exec of the NASGP. And I can't wait for this conversation because it really is a hot topic. So most sessional GPs are working across multiple practices. Some of you know them relatively well and you've been working them for quite a long time, sort of interim purposes, but many of you will be travelling, sort of far and wide, particularly at the moment, and going into practices that you may be only, sort of go in every now and then, or it's only a one-off. And AI is being talked about everywhere, but most clinicians are still really wary, and I think a lot of practices and the NHS in general are very wary, and they still don't know what it actually means. So for that 10-minute consultation sort of tomorrow morning, what does that mean for you? So I'm going to crack on and ask Keith, if you could start. So when we talk about AI in general practice, what are we actually talking about from a day-to-day clinical work?
Yeah, so AI always gets defined in lots of different ways. It's just using a computer to do something that your brain would otherwise do. Nice, easy way of doing it. There's kind of three broad ways in which people will be using it in general practice. Some of the more common ones, less common now, but will become very, very common later. The first one would be clinical AI, things like decision support and so on. People probably aren't using it quite so much for that right now, but that's the broad one. When people talk about AI, they think about using it in that way. That is more under device regulation, and so people are maybe seeing less of that right now. So that's kind of the first lot. Although people may be using things like ChatGPT or Claude, like in a sort of shadow fashion alongside, and we can maybe come back to that. The one that everyone's really going to be bumping into mostly is ambient voice technology, or AVT, or scribes, which is documentation, essentially transcribing and summarizing consultations, and that's been pretty widely adopted, or it's growing very fast. And as a locum or a sessional GP, I am sure you will go from place to place where they're using it, not using it, using different ones, and so on, and may have your own experience with that so far. And then the final one, which is very much going to be a big part of everyone's life, is agentic AI, which I'll come back. And that's when AI is being used to, in essence, kind of undertake tasks. Instead of just doing Q&A, a very narrow task, it's a very broad range of tasks. And that could be either in your clinical work, but you're independent businesses as well, of course, aren't you, as a sessional GP? And I think that's where some of the biggest impact's going to be, because AI is not just about your workplace, it's about the rest of your life as well. And I think that might be an interesting one to discuss. So that's maybe the sort of the big ways in which people are using it, not to mention how patients are using it.
Yeah, interesting. Yes, and I think Claire had something to say about that. So do I. But do you think that sort of generally the GPs are sort of over or underestimating what AI can do right now, or sort of like some of the things that they can start to do into the future, or do you think they're barely on it at the moment?
I think it's quite mixed. I think people are overestimating what it can do clinically and massively underestimating what it can do more broadly as well. It all depends on how much you use it yourselves too. But when people speak of AI, they often go, well, what about diagnosis and treatment and management and so on? And of course, there's great promise there and actually quite a lot of good work happening. But the bar's set understandably higher because of safety and efficacy and so on. But as you kind of come further back from the clinical work phase, the actual helping patients straight up, and you start looking at the kind of clinical kind of back office or middle office and administrative tasks, that's where people really genuinely have no idea how powerful AI can be, and actually is increasingly, just in terms of scheduling and moving tasks and, you know, addressing some of that administrative bits. It's not come through very much just yet, but particularly since around about November last year, there's been a really big step change in the power of these, and you're not going to be seeing them so much in practice just yet. But if you've been using it at home and you're using things like, the example I always give is Claude Cowork, you'll probably start to see the beginnings of that happening. And I think that will naturally push back up the way. So yeah, like many things, in fact, there's a guy called Ethan Mollick that talks about AI very well, and he talks about a jagged frontier, where AI can be very powerful in some areas and kind of stupid in other areas, and that's constantly changing. And then the things that you're good at and need some help with are very personal. And so working with AI is all about, well, which tool do I use for which piece? And because that's quite personal, based on yourself and the technologies, people have to sort of work that out a little bit. So there's a combination of that, plus the tools that are kind of given to you. If you're a sessional GP, you basically choose what you put in your bag, don't you? And actually the technology you bring with you will be part of it, which can have some challenges when we're going to come back to.
Yeah. Claire, from your perspective, how are you seeing it sort of coming in? Because you will be, I think you work for a few fairly regular practices, but I'm assuming you do some odd ones that are here and there as well.
I do, absolutely. And so it's very variable from practice to practice. And one of my sort of first questions when I arrive at a new practice is, what are you using? And do you have AVT that I can use while I'm here? And always have my part of the kit that I now have in my bag is a webcam or a mic, something that can record audio if there is the option for me to use AVT at that practice, of course. But there's loads of ways, actually. I was thinking of all of the types of AI that I've experienced in my clinical work, and I was surprised how many actually there are. There's Keith mentioned as well about patients using it. We often get patients coming in saying, well, I have ran my stuff through ChatGPT, or even I've ran the MRI report in my back that I got privately through ChatGPT, and it disagrees with the clinical assessment of it. I see protocols now that I can tell have sort of had an AI influence to them that have been written by practices, for example, for the CQC stuff. I see radiology reports coming back that have a little disclaimer about how some software has been used to help produce them. I work at some practices that are using AI software to triage patients into slots to free up a clinician or part of the clinician so that the clinician doesn't have to sit and kind of triage themselves. And I'm seeing documents and bloods and stuff like that being processed, coded by software as well. So there's actually loads of ways that I'm kind of seeing it as I'm sitting in a clinic as a sessional GP.
Yeah, really interesting. And just from both of your perspective, you talk about different organisations, sort of like some of the acute trusts or even individual practices. Do you think that a lot of the technology that is being used around AI at the moment is sort of almost boxed in with a particular product, or do you think people are using it quite wildly on their own sort of their own version of chat or Claude?
I mean, my observation is that, you know, you'll have some sort of boxed off versions, like come to a place, they say, we are using this and we are using that. But that shouldn't be too unfamiliar to people, because as a locum, or I used to go to a practice, there was less variation, I suppose, when you had 2 or even 3 clinical systems. But now you're going to have myriad other tools as well. And they'll be familiar in some regards, but this is the first kind of bear trap, I suppose, for sessional GPs, is that when you use any of these technologies, one of the really key things that you do in clinical safety work is assess what the risks of the technology might be and how you might control for those risks. And a principal control is understanding the product and having people trained on using the product. And I don't mean like literally a piece of paper saying, oh, it's easy to use, get on with it. You know, these are very powerful tools. And for a lot of them, particularly scribes, you have a very important part to play. You have to check the output. That's a critical part of making it safe. So you can see how if you're moving from practice to practice and they have a lot of different technologies, that's going to start putting a bit of pressure on your effectiveness of being that human in the loop. It's going to get kind of taxing as well. You know, it was hard enough for just a few clinical systems, but if you're going to lots of different places, that's just an extra thing to juggle, isn't it? Might eat up all the time you get back from having a scribe.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually interesting, this is one of the things that I think you picked up on, Claire, was, you know, one of the questions, but if I walked into a practice that you'd never been into before, it's got a different EMIS build, it's got local referral rules, it's unfamiliar prescribing, where does AI actually help? And actually, can it realistically reduce the cognitive load of an unfamiliar environment, which sort of speaks to that, doesn't it, Claire?
Yeah, so this could be my naivety, I suppose, but I don't think there's a product that can help me with that. You know, I can't say, hey, product, today I am at X practice in X ICB area. You know, what bring me the formulary, show me the referrals for this, you know, this particular place. I could be wrong, but I don't think there is. But where I suppose it can help is if I am able to use a sort of piece of kit that can do the ABT side of things, it might just free up a bit of my mental space so that I've got time to then screen message people and say, where's this and where's that, without running horrendously over time and then feeling like, oh, that was a tough day. Am I wrong, Keith? Is there something?
No. Well, it's interesting. There is literally not one thing that you can describe as a problem in practice that couldn't be addressed using the modern technologies. But the practical way of you know, like building it's no problem, getting it out there and getting people using it is another. I think, yeah, there are some products out there. There's a few companies that, I'll give one example. There's a company called OLAS, EOLAS, just in terms of interest. We've done some clinical work for them, so I can mention some others. But they act as a sort of natural language interface, you know, like a chatbot type thing. And it will draw, you can ask your clinical questions and it will draw from international and national guidelines, but it will also draw from local guidelines as well. So remember those, but you don't have any of those dirty great locum packs that are sort of sitting gathering dust on the side with all the local policies and where to refer and so on. You know, products like that can start to help. And there's other companies like MedWise and so on. And then if you use Copilot within the NHS, if it's configured correctly and a practice had their information stored in an accessible format, you could use Copilot to ask the same thing as well. It's interesting as you talk about this. You know, I'm not working on the front line anymore, and so I dare say I would react to the problems that I face with trying to solve them. Wouldn't it be great if instead of having to adopt the system that you go to, you just take one system with you and it talks to it? So, you know, you turn up with you and your EHR and your technology, and then integration happens in the background. I mean, technically this could be done. It would certainly make people more effective.
Interesting, very interesting. I'll come back on that one, because that use of Copilot and sort of utilize it, making sure your files, and because I know that obviously industry sectors have all tried to wrap around. So the legal industry, for example, have got, sort of very specific tools that they can use that resource the sort of like UK legal, sort of pathways and things. So it's interesting to see how we can do that. But I'm going to dip in a little bit more into the detail here, because for those people who really haven't experienced much of this or feel really unnerved about it, can you just explain what ambient voice technology in a consultation room actually means? What actually happens?
Well, I can explain the technical side, and then Claire, I'm actually not seeing patients, so you can talk about how the reality of it. So ambient voice technology, or scribes, in essence, are pretty straightforward in that you have a microphone in the room, and clinician is speaking to a patient or other people in the room. It captures the audio, it transcribes it, turns it into text, and then that text is then sent to a large language model or an AI, which will then format it in a sort of set of well-structured notes. So it essentially creates the notes for you, at which point it comes back to you. You as the clinician will review it, maybe make any edits, because it can occasionally get things wrong, either because there's a lot of reasons why it could be wrong, but there may be something slightly wrong with it. You update it and either copy and paste it back into the notes, or increasingly it gets integrated directly back into the notes. That's the basics of what it does. And I mean, I could go into how it feels to use it, but Claire, you're using it. So, I mean, I have used it clinically, but in an earlier iteration. So Claire, what's it like in the real world?
Yeah, what's it like in the real world? So the first thing I do is I get consent. And I suppose I've already got consent from the practice, like, oh yeah, we're all using that. It's normally obvious because there's posters all around the consulting room anyway, saying what that product does for patients to look at, but you've got to get consent from the patient. And interestingly, I've never had anybody say no. Lots of people assume you're already using something anyway. And then the other half of people say, oh, that sounds good, I could be doing with that in my life. That takes a bit of time, because it normally generates a conversation, and you've lost a minute of your 10 or 15 minute consultation time. But consent is important to get. And then you just consult. Some doctors I know say it's changed their consulting style, because let's say when they're examining the patient, they might say, yes, your abdomen feels soft and non-tender, or something like that. Sort of dictating so that the software can hear what it can't see. But actually, you don't need to kind of be that formal about it. You could just say your tummy feels fine, and it knows how to then make that sound posh when you get the notes back at the end. So after doing the consultation, then I'll look at what it's generated. And the way I do it at the moment, I'm using one that doesn't integrate. So you have to literally copy and paste something. So I tend to sometimes not bother at all, because the consultation is so straightforward that I just prefer to write it. But then I still write that I've consented the patient in case, because I did, and I did use it. But otherwise, I tend to just copy and paste the history and use that, and then do the rest of my notes how I would have done before. Because I quite like how it's good at capturing the complex history and the detail that I might have otherwise forgotten. Because there's always a difference between what a clinician feels is relevant and what the patient feels is sort of important in the history. And I think it's nice how it can then capture what the patient feels is important, and then I can add my impression and my diagnosis and my couple of sentences of where my clinical thinking is, so that I can pick it up next time and carry on, and it still reads like my sort of notes and my thought process. But from a patient point of view, they can look at their notes, which most of patients now do, and they will often go in immediately afterwards, I hear, and look and see what you've sort of written about the consultation, and see that you've actually captured, exactly what date things started and how long they've had it for, and some of that detail that you might have otherwise not put into the notes because it's not clinically relevant. So that's how I'm using it at the moment, which may be quite different to other clinicians who might copy and paste the whole thing in. But that's my personal sort of preference for using it at the moment. I've only been using it about 3 months, I would say. So I'm certainly not a trailblazer when it comes to it, but that's how I use it, practically speaking, in my consultations.
Can I just reflect on that, actually? What's interesting is I'm really liking the way you approach it in a hybrid way. You know, I don't think many people are talking about this. You don't have to take what's given. You can use the parts that you want. And some of the scribes will allow you to have different templates so it can format it in a different way. But I think that's very smart because, you know, obviously when a doctor or anyone's writing notes, you're not literally just transcribing and writing down what's going on. The writing is the thinking, and you can't outsource all of that. Those that do, I think, sometimes find that their memory of the consultation isn't quite as crisp and so on. So I think what you've naturally adopted there, Claire, makes a great deal of sense and also allows you to reflect on it a little bit more.
Can I circle back a little bit just on the patient side of things from both of your perspectives? Claire, I'm going to come to you first, but you talked about the way that patients are using it. How are you finding that changing? I mean, obviously we've had, we always talk about Dr. Google as well, don't we? You know, patients are becoming more and more independent with the amount of information that's available to them. But is this posing a slightly different challenge, or is it pretty much the same as Google? How would you sort of see it change in your conversation with the patients?
Yeah, we're quite familiar with patients using Dr. Google and saying that they're using Dr. Google, and I personally don't find that a threat at all. It's helpful. And one thing that we're taught as GPs is to understand the patient's ideas, concerns, and expectations, because then that drives the whole consultation, and you get to the outcome that the patient is looking for kind of in a shared way. So I don't think many of us are kind of scared of that or annoyed by it anymore. The thing that they're now using Dr. ChatGPT, I suppose, and it just sometimes gets a little bit difficult when they've sort of said, I've put something in and it's come up with a different thing to what my consultant has said, and therefore I want to get a second opinion. There's almost more, it feels like they trust the Dr. ChatGPT more than they did the Dr. Google, which with the Dr. Google, they were quite happy for you to sort of say, whereas they're kind of more trusting of the ChatGPT answer that they've been given, and it's more difficult to turn around.
See that, absolutely. I can see that because I suppose they're almost feeling that it's more legitimate in its research. Keith, would you say that that's going to be a challenge for the medical profession moving forward as patients become more informed and the access to it is more streamlined and not so general?
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, there'll be upsides and downsides to it as well. I think the first thing to say is that the way that AI works, particularly with its kind of agreeableness as well, and the fact that people can have longer conversations and it can sometimes be slightly personalized, means that people will come probably better disposed towards AI than just Google because of everything that's happened over the years that that it might not be trusted sources and so on. So I think it is important that patients will vary in the same way that doctors and clinicians will vary about how much they know about how these things are built. I think it's very, very important to understand that we're not teaching it widely at all right now, which is a big gap. But everyone will be aware about hallucinations, that these models can put erroneous information in and so on. I think it's probably more important to let patients know that the information that's used to train these models is very, very broad and can be very, very excellent, but can also have things that are less excellent as well, and also may represent an international perspective. So you may get a medical perspective that reflects a US-centric form of delivering care. So people will be asking for things that you just simply can't get in the UK or are not appropriate and so on. I think the other really worrying thing with all of this is that when you're using AI, you're often putting personal information into this, and what happens to that data is important to know. Now, with some of the models, if a person uses a free model, some of them will use that data for training. Now, you can turn this off, and that offers a degree of protection, but patients may not realize that they're merely uploading lots of images and so on and so forth, and it's just being fed straight back into the model for the next training run, and they're not going to maybe feel terribly comfortable about their personal information potentially surfacing somewhere else in the future. So I think there's a bit of to and fro on that. But I can imagine the consultation that would come across that they're already worried that you're going to be angry that they've done this, and then you start saying, but what about the data and so on. We've got some education to do in there. But yeah, I think it's the trusted sources.
Yeah, really valid point there. And are we, am I right in saying that, well, actually, let me just put that in a different way. The technology that's being used or the products that are being used within general practice at the moment, I'm assuming they've gone through all of the legitimate sort of tests, DB, I can never remember the acronym, DBN 01.
I'll go through them, don't worry.
Yeah, and sort of like the medical device, so that when you are using it as a professional, that they are all covered by sort of the governance and the checks that are around, sort of not going out into an open source.
Well, you would hope so. But Yusuf Oscroci, who works with me at Curistica, and a couple of other authors, published in the JMIR last year, looking at the compliance with one of the standards, the clinical safety standard, DCB, which is legally required in England for any digital health technology that's deployed in real-time or near real-time patient care. It's been a requirement since 2012. We looked at with a Freedom of Information Act request to all the trusts and ICBs in England, got a very high response rate. And the headline figure is 70.1% of the technologies deployed were not compliant in the form of having an 0129 or an 0160. Now, that doesn't mean they were necessarily unsafe, but they hadn't done that work. That's just one portion of what you have to do. Data protection is the other side of things as well, cyber security, testing of integration, usability, and so on. And then medical device regulation applies, again, legally enforceable if the product performs things like diagnosis, treatment, prevention, management of a medical illness. So if a company has medical device certification, then there's a pretty good feeling about exactly what's been done to make that product safe. But the question is, has the organization deploying it done what they need to do to make sure it's safe? This is the big part. This is the massive gap, and the big part that we at Curistica spend a lot of time working on. It doesn't have to be complex, but everyone does governance for everything else. Technology is no different. What does it do? Who does it do it to? And where is it doing it? How could it go wrong? Can you recognize when it goes wrong? And what do you do when it goes wrong? That's it. That loop.
Yeah.
Same for technology, and that's being unevenly applied. So I think if you're working in a practice and they've procured a technology recently, I don't know whether you're going to be checking yourself when you go in there as well, but they're working through that. Sometimes it was done at ICB level, sometimes it's done somewhere else. But medical device certification, if it's in there, is a comfort.
And I guess really from a CQC perspective as well, they've obviously got a vested interest in making sure that everything's safe and secure and legally and medically compliant. Is that causing any issues generally at the moment, or are they sort of keeping on board with the updates? Because I know when I've asked previously about digital, they've said it's actually how it's applied as opposed to the product itself. So I suppose it comes back to some of your points there.
Yeah, and Claire, because you've got some take on the CQC here, and we've had meetings with the CQC about this because they haven't published much on this so far. There was a Mythbuster on AI published last year where they indicate the direction of travel. I don't think people will be terribly surprised about what they're wanting to do. They just want to make sure that you've done the necessary due diligence and you're monitoring it and monitoring the quality of the care that's put out there. But there are some sort of details within there about, well, what would be evidence of that? And so when we work with practices and PCNs and the like on this, part of our work is to help set them up so they can show this. I think the CQC have got a lot of plates spinning at the moment, and I'm not sure they're quite clear on exactly what an inspection would involve or anything just yet. I mean, we've certainly got thoughts about this, and we're working with another organization to kind of put together a guide for inspectors.
Right.
To help them, because the inspectors coming in may not have in-depth knowledge about the technology, and you don't want to be like having to dig up a lot of information if it's not valuable to the inspector, and you want the inspectors to understand what they're doing. So the way I and we at Curistica approached it is that the CQC have got a lot going on. We know quite a bit about it, so we can put together what we think would be an appropriate way. And then the idea is that we then can maybe participate in the roundtables the CQC does. I think it is doable, but it's not very clear to everyone exactly what it would be. But I think, Claire, do you think similar sort of story?
Yeah, I think that's an accurate summary. They're in this kind of weird position in a way because they're regulating practice providers, not the software, but then the providers are using the software. So there's got to be something, some sort of oversight there. And I don't think that they'd be offended if well, like Keith said, not every inspector is going to have the kind of digital expertise, but they probably don't themselves in-house as an organization have the kind of digital expertise to even, it's an unknown. You don't know what you need to do about a thing that you don't understand. That's probably the situation they're in at the moment. That's why they're having these kind of round tables and gathering experts on board. So, would like to be there.
Now, when you go into practice now, how do you sort of satisfy yourself that if you are going to be using some stuff that they have actually done it, or you're comfortable to use it even?
Yeah. Well, I think the only thing that I'd be using would be the AVT, and I only would use it where they're already using that exact same product.
Yeah, fair enough. And I guess really the last question around this one really is, do the current indemnity arrangements sort of cover sort of approved products within sort of AI and AVT, or are we still out on is the jury out on that one as well at the moment?
Well, I'm really interested what you hear. I think it's still not absolutely nailed down, if I'm honest. But the MDOs have evolved a lot recently, and I was with the MDDUS, and I speak to them about this a lot as well. And I think in terms of if you're using it, if you're an employee using it in an organization and they've procured it and everything like that, there's a degree of the protection within there. I think the shifty bit comes if you're like using it off your own Mac. And one thing that guarantee you some of the sessional GPs listening this will go to a practice without AVT and will just fire up the AVT that they have on their phone with one of the providers as well, and then find a way that they think is secure to get it across, perhaps maybe emailing it themselves through an NHS mail or something like that. Sorry, that's not the right way to do it. I understand why people will do this sort of thing. But that sort of situation, at that point, I suppose the person would be covered from the practice or Crown side. You'd be looking at what the MDOs would say. And I think they're still exploring that. I think there's ways in which people might use it and think they're being careful and right, but they may be exposing themselves a little bit. I don't know, Claire, is that a fair thing to say? We're not entirely sure yet. It's still being worked out.
Yeah, it's a bit of a minefield and probably could be doing with some unfortunate sort of test cases. But I am aware of locum GPs using it anyway, even though they know that a practice isn't using it. So then I wonder, are they consenting patients and then documenting it? And then is somebody from the practice saying, hold on a minute, you're using a thing that we haven't allowed you to use? Or are they kind of doing it totally under the radar, which is also maybe starting to breach into sort of probity stuff as well, perhaps, if we're being you're looking at this from a kind of regulatory perspective. Obviously, I think we can all understand the why some locums might be using it, because it is helpful in a consultation. And then from the indemnity point of view, of course, the Crown indemnity, the CNSGP, that covers clinical negligence. Don't cover anything else. So if something were to come back to you personally as a clinician or a probity thing, then that's all nothing to do with CNSGP and whatever indemnity arrangements you may or may not have with an MDO. Because there are some clinicians that say, well, I'll just go for the Crown indemnity and I'll risk it, take a gamble and not have any other indemnity and hope that I never get a kind of GMC process or something else that I might want to rely on somebody to help me with. I think the
thing that's most likely to trip you up here is the data protection. Because if you're operating that way, have you done a DPA with the organization with which you've done this, or a data processing agreement? Are you comfortable that the data is being moved and held in a secure way? And if that patient then submits a complaint to practice about something and then asks entirely correctly for their records and everything, and that locum is somewhere else or anything, it's on you. And the ICO does pursue these things, and the fines can be eye-watering. Data protection, oddly enough, is the one that is more likely to pop up than things like clinical safety and the like. So I would urge caution on this one. But equally, I do totally understand that work is extremely hard. you've got so many things juggling around, and what are you going to do? So I think people need to maybe think carefully about this and make sure that they maintain their contingency plan of still knowing how to write notes, and not outsourcing everything to Scribe.
Yeah, that's really, and I think the one thing that I'm taking home from this conversation really from an NASGP perspective, so when our members go and sort of obtain work through practice, through locum deck, we tend to try and get the practice to really update their policies and procedures. And I think it's probably a really good idea, given the world that we're moving into now, that we ask the practices to sort of put up their, like I say, their DP, their sort of data protection arrangements and the kind of things that they've gone through, or any technology that they are using that they've sort of gone through the necessary approval process. I guess really would be quite useful for members. Yes, Claire?
Yeah. Well, in the same way that at the moment on locum deck, you can see whether practice is EMIS or System 1 or something else. You could, it'd be useful to know what else they're using, just so you can prepare yourself sort of mentally, if nothing else. But equally, that on locum deck, the clinician can say what software and EPRs they're used to using. So there can be that tick box where I can tick which ones I'm familiar and happy to use, so long as the practice is sort of set up.
Yeah.
So it's a two-way thing.
Yeah, I won't go into the details. We're just about to launch a product which is free for practice managers and practices to use to help them list their technologies and establish that. I won't go into it all here just now for this, but there may be some news coming out about that. And the idea behind that is to help practices understand their technology and their compliance status for things like CQC and so on. But I can see a way in which actually that information could quite readily be adapted to serve the needs of locum deck or something like that. It's just, but I'm sorry that it's just one more thing that people feel that they're going to have to sort of think about and balance and so on. I think there's a way to navigate it, and this podcast has been good to maybe sort of raise some of it. So finding out more about it, and the situation's moving quite fast as well. It's not as if everyone knows the answer and it just hasn't been cascaded out yet. It is evolving. So you're in the same boat as I'm speaking to the audience here. You're in the same boat as a lot of people.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair comment. Well, we're coming up to the close of the podcast. It seems to have gone really, really quickly. And I thank you both for your contribution. I'm sure that the members will find it particularly interesting and helpful. And from a member's perspective, we'll make sure that we give Keith's details afterwards. And obviously, Claire, you do a lot of the mediation as well. And this may come in some mediation things in the future. You never know. So if you were going to give our sort of members a parting I don't know, bit of a quick win as sort of advice, what would the one thing would be that for Keith?
Okay, so for me, first of all, I'd say it's one thing, you can't learn about AI from attending a course or a podcast or anything like that. AI, more than almost any technology that I've ever experienced, and I've experienced a lot, benefits from actually using it. But then you're in a bit of a catch-22, because if you're working clinically, you're worried about doing so. So my advice to you is this: get yourself a paid subscription to one of the decent models, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, or something like that. And then use it a lot, but use it on a hobby. Right? Do something that you're reasonably expert and interested in that doesn't have a terrible blast radius if things go wrong, as in, if you're a gardener or something. The nice thing about doing that is that you'll naturally use it in a more expansive way. You'll have a greater tolerance of when things don't work. You'll start to identify what it can and can't do in a way that no number of podcasts or anything will help. Yeah, use it and use it safely. And as you do that, you'll understand what it can and can't do in a much better way. And you will naturally better understand what happens on the clinical side of things as well. So that's my advice to everyone here.
That is brilliant advice. Really, really great advice. Thanks, Keith. Claire, what about you from your perspective?
Nice. I like that advice. But I would go one step further and say, try it. Try the AVT. Even if you get a free trial, and you, like I did at the beginning, I was a kind of late skeptical user of it. I used it at home, and I had a pretend consultation with myself and just sort of see what it would look like. But then try it in a practice that's using it and has all of the setup and is happy for you to use it. Just give it a go. And if you get the consent from the patient and then you look at it and think, oh, that's garbage, I hate it, doesn't matter. You haven't kind of lost anything because you've done it in that kind of safe setting. Yeah. So give it a little go. Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say, on the top of that, I was going to say the tiny little thing as well is one thing I really would love people to do is, if things don't work or go wrong, know how to report it to the place that you're working. This is the biggest gap right now, and why the technology we have isn't as good as it should be, is we're not closing the loop. Because people will report medical problems, drug problems, everything. They almost never report the technological problems. At a practice, if something goes pear-shaped, even in a small way, let them know. That is how we start getting better products.
Perfect. Well, thanks both for your time this morning. It's been really helpful. Like I say to members, we'll make sure we put the details of Claire and Keith up so that if you want to go have a look at websites and things like that, you can do. But thanks very much both for your time. Really informative. And I hope the members have found it of interest as well. So take care. Thank you.